Now that we've had a glimpse of how to read a text file using C#, let's jump into Visual Studio to see how it actually works. In Visual Studio, I have my file sample program, in which I have a sample data text file with a couple of lines of text. And I've also added a third line that says new line of text data. If I go to program.c#, see the program is actually pretty small. It has one try-catch block where it tries to read the file. Earlier I had explained that using statements on the top are used for using references, where you could have written some code in the different namespace, or maybe you're using something that was created by Microsoft or another developer. In this case, I'm using StreamReader from the system.io namespace, which is why I have using system.io. You'll notice that I have a different using statement down here. This block is actually different from the using statements we have on top of the file. Whenever you have a using block followed by curly braces, it means that whatever object you're creating, in this case a StreamReader object, this object will be automatically disposed right after it goes out of scope. So when it's no longer being used and it's done with, C# will automatically dispose of it. Let's go ahead and run this program to see how it works. So here you'll notice that it's actually reading the code or the data line by line. So I have 3 lines of data right now. I can go ahead and close that. So how about this exception down here? I have a generic exception that is catching. So the way to trigger an exception like that is I could just mess up my sample data file by adding some numbers at the back. So now I have a sample data file that's called sampledata.txt, but I've renamed the file here to sampledata7357.txt, which does not exist. So if I click on the start button again, you'll notice that I actually have an error message that says this file could not be read. And it has a path here for the file it is trying to read. So let's see how else we can trigger that same exception. Right now, this generic exception will catch any kind of exception. So instead of an exception called just exception, I will type in file not found exception. This will actually trigger only when a file is not found. So if I run the program again, it should do the exact same thing. Run it one more time. You'll note it has the exact same error message. The file could not be read. And that's what I'm writing out to the screen. So how would you catch multiple exceptions? The way you do that is you would add in yet another catch block, and you could add as many exceptions as you want. The more generic ones should be further down below. So let's say I have generic exception that I'm about to catch. And I can say console.writeLine and say this is generic. Now, it says here that I have never used this exception. It's declared but never used. So I can go ahead and copy this line up here, console.writeLine, and I'd like to print that out as well and change it to generic exception. So that way, Visual Studio won't ask me to go ahead and use it. So every time you declare something, you might get a little green squiggly line underneath your variables if you haven't used them. So let's go ahead and run the program again. This time you'll notice that it's still hitting the first error message because it never hits that generic one. This goes to show you if you have a series of exceptions, you should have the more generic ones below. That way anything that's not caught by the exception handler above it, it'll drop down to the next one. So again, this is a quick example of how you can read files and handle exceptions in C#.